Chapter 5 Surrey Interlude Mid-morning on the following day found Holmes and myself at Waterloo Station, where the sleuth purchased 2 tickets to Lichfield. Our train journey to Surrey was uneventful. During most of it, my friend leaned back in his seat with his hat pulled over his eyes, his chin sunk on his chest, and his long legs stretched out before him. He might have been catnapping, or his brain could just as easily have been churning. I guessed that neither was the case and that he was instead disassociating himself from our discussion with his brother and the events of the previous evening, so that he could approach the Deeds mansion and its problems with a clear mind. It was Holmes's contention that a brain free of supposition and unclouded by half-truths was like an unused photographic plate, ready to take impressions. A four-wheeler awaited our arrival at the station and whisked us into the countryside. The rain had passed through the area on its way to London, and the greens were greener because of it. A spring sun projected lukewarm rays to brighten the scene, and everywhere was a soft, almost melodious sound as swollen rivulets attempted to drain off the surface water that had accumulated during the torrents of the past few days. As we wound through curved lanes bordered by hedges and trees, eagerly displaying the first new growth of the season, there was the musty but not unpleasant odor of wet leaves and moist earth. Into these tranquil surroundings a seeming contradiction sprang to my mind and travelled to my lips. Did Deeds mention why he lived down country? It would seem your interest in the racing world is confined to the enemies that you wager on, old fellow. I admitted as much. But they had to come from somewhere. Macewood is well known as a stud farm. By Jove, I have heard of it, but did not associate it with our client. No matter. Possibly you can secure some hot tips on potential winners of the future. Our road now left the trees and progressed up a slope towards an imposing marble building, much as Dietz had described it. I noted a considerable cluster of buildings in the rear, obviously stables, and white rail fences that subdivided lush meadowland. In one area there were several jumps, and everywhere there was the neat and clipped white on green one would expect at a breeding farm. As we reached the crest of the incline, our carriage swept round the imposing house and we found Clyde. I forced myself to think of him as Deeds, speaking to 2 gillies in the stable area. He crossed towards us immediately, a smile creasing his firm face. "I trust your journey was pleasant, gentlemen." "Quite," replied Holmes. His busy eyes were absorbing the scene, as were mine. A number of horses were being released to follow familiar paths towards pastures. Some of the animals were mature, powerful beasts, given to demonstrate their fit condition. With leaps and lashing feet as they gained momentum and streaked into the fenced areas that surrounded the establishment. Our host, in riding trousers and cavalry boots, with an open shirt, was a far cry from the dandy of the previous day. As he led us toward the mansion house, I could not suppress a question. Any potential stakes winners among your animals? We always hope. Several yearlings show unusual promise and their bloodlines are excellent. There's one, sired by Nurania, that we're excited about. We were close by the dwelling now. A porte cochere was the main feature of this side of the mansion, and a large affair it was. Two carriages could have driven underneath it at the same time. Deeds indicated puzzlement as to the next move. Would you care to wash up now, before lunch, or does a visit to the scene of the incident appeal? Being outside, let us view the balcony from the ground, suggested Holmes, and our host led us round the nearby corner. The north side of Macewood had an imposing flight of steps up to a formal entryway, this being the front entrance, though I imagined the major traffic passed through the door by the porte cochere. Further along, the smooth stone walls formed a right-angle recess, allowing for a second-story balcony, onto which five French windows opened. The break in the rectangular shape of the edifice was a pleasing architectural touch. The balcony was fronted by a stone balustrade, on which were ornamental heads of savage beasts. In the center a lion's head was slightly larger than its companions, a nice patriotic touch, I thought. "This being the balcony that you feel the intruder reached?" questioned Holmes, in a manner that indicated his query was purely form. Dietz nodded. "For the life of me, I don't see how he made it." I didn't, either. The windows on the ground floor were all effectively barred. Above them the walls were smooth, and any ledges or projections of some sort that would have given a cat burglar the households necessary to reach the balcony were just not there. Stout English ivy, which has served the lawless so well, was also absent. Dietz and I watched Holmes survey the side of the building and then move to a different position to view the balcony from another angle. When the horse breeder looked at me questioningly, I indicated that I was as ignorant as he was to what was going through the sleuth's mind. This was not quite true, of course. "Suppose I go inside now and clean up," suggested he. "If you would care to view the sitting room, Dooley will show you up." "Capital," responded Holmes in a preoccupied manner. As our client removed himself, I turned anxiously to my companion. Unless he had already come upon something, I fancied that he was viewing the scene and asking his agile mind what he would do were he a burglar intent on reaching the balcony. Before I could frame a question, Holmes's eyes found mine. "A poser, would you say, Watson?" "Indeed, I cannot imagine how one of those human flies from the circus world could do it. Well, he did not climb the walls, he did not use a ladder, such equipment could not have been removed in time, and, he added, chuckling, he did not fly, lacking wings. Then how? There's certainly no clue. You are not at your best, old chap. By eliminating the most common methods, we must settle on a rope, an aid used by mountain climbers all the time. My mouth sagged, not at Holmes's simple explanation, but at my idiocy for not thinking of it myself. "Here I stand," continued the detective. "It is a dark and rainy night, important since the sound of falling water serves to cover any noise. In my hand is a coil of line attached to a light grappling hook. From right about here," he said, positioning himself, "I believe I could cast the hook upwards and over that stone balustrade. When the tines of the hook grip the railing, I keep the line taut and swarm up to the second story. Now, if clever, I prepare for the worst by releasing the grappling hook, passing it under the rail of the balustrade and lowering it to the ground. Now I have two strands of rope leading to the ground. I enter Macewood via the French windows, but I hear approaching sounds. I flee back to the balcony and lower myself rapidly by sliding down the lines. Back at ground level, I pull the line free and disappear into the darkness. 'Tis done. Holmes, that's amazing. You have recreated the entire event. Not so, for I have revealed how I would do it. However, should we discover some scratches on that balustrade that might have been made by the hook I envision, I rather fancy the matter is solved. There was a certain self-satisfaction in his words that was grating. I banished my irritation as unworthy. A venerable butler greeted us at the front entrance and led us upstairs. Macewood was high-ceilinged, and most of the rooms were large enough to hold a meeting of the Army General Staff. But the feudal atmosphere of so many English country estates was completely lacking. No surprise, since the mansion was recently erected and this century and the furnishings were of no particular period, but reflected the styles of many lands. The upstairs sitting-room was filled with sunlight from its four French windows, and the balcony revealed a breathless view of the surrounding countryside. Holmes was surveying the stone balustrade with his ever-present pocket-glass when Dietz rejoined us, now clad in tweeds. Holmes's movements had become more feverish as he moved from section to section of the stone railing, and finally he regarded us both with an expression akin to chagrin. I presented a plausible explanation to Watson regarding the coming and going of your uninvited guest, but the necessary corroboration eludes me. I had begun to explain to Dietz Holmes's idea when there was a sharp exclamation from the sleuth, who was now inspecting the outside of the railing. "All is not lost!" he exclaimed as we crossed to stand beside him, following the line indicated by his outstretched index finger. The ornamental lion's head on the outside of the balustrade rail was missing half an ear. "What's this?" said Dietz. I wonder when that happened. Quite recently, replied Holmes in a triumphant tone. Note how the newly revealed marble is not weathered as is the stone around it. My basic idea was sound, but I missed on the execution. Deeds was regarding him with a baffled expression that I recognized and well understood. Allow me to recreate the actions of your intruder. Holmes shot me a quick glance. This time, correctly. The man stood below me, having no doubt seen you, Mr. Deeds, depart. He held a light but strong line with a weight attached to its end, similar to the South American bolo. He spun the weighted line around his head, much in the manner of a cowboy of the American West with a lariat, and then cast it upwards. The weighted end wrapped itself around this ornament, knocking off part of an ear in the process. Holding the line taut, he climbed up. Once here, on the balcony, he removed the weighted end, ran it under the rail, and let it drop to the ground. I would estimate that on departure he could slide down the rope and pull the unweighted end free in a matter of 15 seconds, especially if he wore gloves or had heavily calloused hands. Deeds was shaking his head. You have solved the mystery with a very clear explanation, Mr. Holmes. What do I do now? I don't know. Nor do I know my next move unless I find out what the intruder was after. This suggestive remark was allowed to dangle for a brief moment, and I felt that we might be getting somewhere. But then Dietz looked away. Was there an expression of guilt on his face? I can't tell you, he finally said. This could have been read two ways, but Holmes did not choose to pursue the matter. Rather, he turned to admire the vista of rolling green fields. I note the horses all around us, he said casually. Deeds eagerly seized on the change of subject. We keep the brood mares separate, of course, but allow the yearlings and the stallions to roam at will. We are at the crest of the hill here, and the fields stretch on every side. They are well fenced, and it gives the young fellows a chance to watch the sires. They seem to develop faster that way, chasing after patter, as it were. I understand, said Holmes, that horses, especially race horses, rather fancy companions. Roosters, dogs. Some do. Before my father bought Macewood, he raised dogs, but he developed a skin allergy that the doctors attributed to canine hair. That was the end of the dogs. Whippets? Greyhounds, perhaps? Dobermans, was the reply. Holmes allowed this subject to drop as well. By unspoken mutual consent, we all retired to the interior, descending the great stairs towards the dining room, where we enjoyed a tasteful luncheon and some excellent Burgundy that our host recommended highly. I was prompted to inquire as to where he had secured this vintage, but suppressed the question as it seemed in poor taste. Holmes informed our client that we would return to London via the afternoon train, and that he would make inquiries as to the presence in England of a second-story man who had come from or had been in the Argentine. He used the word "gaucho" in connection with the suspect, and said in an encouraging manner that a thief with a particular aptitude that was unusual was much easier to find. Dietz seemed heartened by this fact, and we took our leave of Macewood. The click of wheels on rails along with the Burgundy caused me to sleep much of the way back. When I did rouse myself on the outskirts of London, Holmes anticipated my question. "Of course he knows, Watson." "What?" "What the intruder was after. I suspect we do too." In response to my direct question, you noted that Deed said, "I can't tell you." By that I assumed that he was bound by a promise, perhaps a fear. Then, too, the station master at Lichfield, who directed us to the carriage, and the driver, both knew our names, and I felt that they were aware of the reason of our visit. It would seem that Deeds enlisted our services as window dressing. Look you beware, for Holmes and Watson are on the scene. Come now, that's stretching it a bit, is it not? Possibly, but consider the matter of the horses and the dogs before them. You'll have to explain that. Captain Spaulding, retired from his explorations, settles down in England and races dogs. Not the racing breed, but Doberman Pinschers, the fiercest watchdogs in the world. A reaction to canine hair causes him to drop this activity and he turns to horse breeding. What is unusual about that? Nothing, until you consider that the way Macewood is laid out. Deeds did say that it was somewhat like a fortress. In addition, it is surrounded by fenced pastures containing, on all sides, high-spirited stallions and skittish yearlings. Were I intent on approaching the Deeds menage surreptitiously, I would think twice before crossing a field at the risk of being run down by a temperamental thoroughbred. When track champions are set out to stud, they evidence frisky ways. Captain Spaulding was intent on protecting something, and with his passing, his son has remained true to the task. Holmes had given me plenty to think about. He was, as was his custom, diligently turning his theory this way and that in his mind, to allow the light of reason to reflect on its various facets. The remainder of our trip to Baker Street was made in silence.